Hello and welcome today to this presentation, Balance and Harmony, Native American Conservation Efforts in Minnesota. So we're going to briefly dive into Native American conservation efforts and resource management. I think it's important to first compare and contrast the Native American approach to a more traditional Western philosophy that most people are familiar with. The Western philosophy in historical context we see through colonial Western expansion across the United States and manifest destiny. So this is one controlling nature, using nature to one's own benefit, as opposed to the Native American one, which is a more holistic approach. One is part of nature and the circle of life rather than controller of it. So one important philosophical element of many Native people all over the United States and other areas is that of harmony and balance. Now, harmony and balance can be achieved through physical, emotional, and psychological well-being. To achieve this well-being, you must have resource gathering that is both practical and spiritual in nature. So Minnesota itself recognizes 11 Native American communities, 7 of which are Ojibwe or Chippewa, and 4 Dakota or Sioux. Now, on the micro level, we can see subtle differences in practice and belief, but on the macro level, we see that shared belief in harmony and balance, not only here in Minnesota, but other areas as well. So one of the groups responsible for conservation efforts here in Minnesota and other places as well is the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. They consist of 8 tribes here in Minnesota and in Wisconsin and Michigan as well. So some of the services they provide are treaty rights, resource management, and conservation efforts. Today we'll focus on conservation efforts and 3 important ones specifically, which are climate change, fishing, and wild rice management. Climate change, a very controversial topic in U.S. today, less so in the Native American community. The belief that the earth should be protected and preserved is a very old traditional Native American belief system, so it works very much in line with climate change and the Native American community. So when you go swimming here soon in whatever lake you choose to, you may not notice much except for that lakes are always very cold here in Minnesota. But to fish, for example, subtle water temperature fluctuations have an adverse effect on their migration, breeding, and feeding habits. Fish are an essential part of Native American communities in used for food and spiritual ceremonies as well. Other areas where climate fluctuation has a very big impact is through our native tree species. Black ash and birch are very, very important trees to Native people in the Ojibwe and Dakota communities. Rising temperatures allow the Asian beetle, for example, to make its way northward and reduce the population of black ash in such a way that we may see it become extinct in just a few years. Specifically, the birch tree bark is used in Ojibwe culture of building baskets, canoes, and creating artwork. Some of the ways groups are combating that is, like the previously mentioned GLIFWC, which has a pilot project to create a seed bank to preserve important tree species for future generations. Other areas we see are through renewable energy, wind turbines, solar panels, and geothermal methods to preserve wetlands and prairies in the local communities of the Dakota people of Shakopee, Mdewakanton Sioux area. We touched briefly upon fish in the previous segment. Fish are an essential part of Native communities in both economic resources and ceremonial practices. Fish are a good source of protein as well as a good economic resource to be sold at local markets as well as others across the U.S. Some important fish species that you're probably familiar with include trout, sturgeon, walleye, and whitefish. These fish are managed through catch and release programs, fishing hatcheries, and invasive species controlling their numbers, such as the sea lamprey that compete with native fish for their food and other resources. A positive impact seen over the years has been through the restocking of lakes in the walleye population. The White Earth Band of Ojibwe, for example, have restocked 54 lakes with over 7 million walleye since 1983. So that's a very good example of how efforts have a positive impact on the environment. Finally, wild rice management. Manoomin is the Ojibwe word for wild rice, which means good berry. Now, traditionally, wild rice has been an important food source as well as a spiritual one. For example, in holds tradition in Ojibwe beliefs that during their migration from the east, they were told to go until they found the place where food grows on the water, that being wild rice. So not only did it give them a food source, it fulfilled a prophecy, which holds true to this day. Wild rice is managed through annual surveys of lakes across the state and in other states that neighbor us, where old seed beds are analyzed to create new ones, or they may be reseeded for reestablishment of existing ones. Finally, before we go today, we're going to do a brief activity where I'll have you break up into groups of 3 to 4 people. Each group then will be given a collection of recyclable materials, including milk jugs, pop cans, and paper. You will use these materials to create something from nature, such as an animal, a plant, maybe a natural rock formation, whatever comes to mind from nature. The final goal of the activity is to use all the materials in your creation without any waste in the end. And we'll get started on that activity, and I thank you again for joining me for this presentation.